anywhere like this now. So thank you for that one. I welcome you all out tonight. This is, I think, my third time down here at McClure. Always enjoy it, always a good time. Tonight I'm going to be talking about a unique topic I've never really done in a public setting before. We're talking about ghosts and folklore of Henry County, which is really interesting to a lot of people. Folklore is something that is kind of ingrained in our society. Folklore are stories that are passed down from generation to generation, and you find that even dealing with history, folklore always has a certain amount of truth to it. Now, whether that means the ghost stories are true or not, that's for you to decide. Since we are in the setting we are, a church, hopefully there's one spirit here. As we're here tonight, hopefully watching over us. I would just like to remind everyone, keep an open mind. You can view this as entertainment. You can use this as fact. You can make up your own decisions. I'm not here to persuade you one way or another about the belief in ghosts, the supernatural, or anything like that. It's the time of the season, right? This is the season. So, of course, since we were in church, I thought it would be really good to start with a little bit of background of why we're here and where this all comes from. Where does ghosts, what are the beliefs of some churches? And if I step out of line, hopefully the pastor will correct me on these very brief facts. Religion, some Christian denominations teach that ghosts are beings who linger in an interim state. It's a middle state, possibly before going on to heaven, hell, or wherever else you're happy to be. On occasion, God would allow souls of the deceased to come back and interact with people like ourselves. That might be to say, hey, I'm doing all right, and I'm going to be on the other side in a much happier place. Or it might be to check on some people and say, you know what, you need to straighten your life out and get it back on track. That's one of the beliefs. Jews and Christians are taught that it is sinful to attempt to conjure or control spirits. Witchcraft, satanic worship, anything like that in the Jewish or Christian denominations in accordance with Deuteronomy, verses 9 through 12 state that it is wrong, it is a sin to interact with the deceased. When a person is gone, ashes to ashes, and dust to dust. In traditional beliefs and in fiction, a ghost, sometimes known as a specter, that comes from the British. When you hear a specter, that comes from the British origin. And English language in the 18th and 19th century became viewed as a phantom, an apparition, or a spook. Today, a ghost. The Holy Bible referred to as the Holy Spirit initially as a ghost. That was later changed, and ghost was changed over to a spirit. So now we don't believe in spirits or ghosts anymore. We believe in spirits instead. Descriptions of an apparition ghost vary widely from an invisible presence to a translucent or barely visible wispy shape. These shapes are sometimes referred to as orbs. Orbs are balls of white light. These will appear in photographs, sometimes on film, video film. Orbs are kind of a topic of argument amongst ghost enthusiasts because bugs can look like orbs when they're filmed. Dust can look like orbs when they're photographed or filmed. And if you're walking in a cemetery or a haunted house or anywhere, you're probably going to kick up a lot of dust. So when dealing with orbs, that kind of gets questionable. But when you start having things appear in film or footage that are wispy, mist-like, then it gets a little bit more difficult to decide if that's a ghost. Or someone having a bonfire at their party, and that mist was just a bad wind change. We'll also see, though, those wispy shapes sometimes are spirits that conjure themselves and they become a little bit more realistic. You can start to make out faces, hands, sometimes even what they're wearing. So far down the detail that those misty shapes can show you the buttons on a soldier's uniform or the eyeglasses that the woman might be wearing. then it gets really difficult to dispute. Then, of course, there is when a spirit has fully conjured itself and it appears lifelike. It looks just like you or I. You say, hey, how you doing? You turn back around and the person is gone. You hear footsteps, you turn around, and there's Grandma on her nightgown, and you say, Grandma, what are you doing? But Grandma hasn't been around for like the last 10 years. So there are a number of different ways spirits, ghosts, those things appear to us or to people today. So a quick survey. We have to have a little fun, right? How many of you are willing to go out on the limb, raise your hand, and say that you have experienced ghostly or spiritual activity at one point in your life? You think you have seen something? I have what my mother did. That will work too. That will work. I like that. Do we always believe what our moms have told us, though? I think mom was best, right? So, how many of you have experienced something in your life that you think that might have been, but I'm not quite sure? I really don't care because I really don't want to know one way or the other. I think there's some of us out there that have done that. Now, of course, then there's other people that don't believe, and that's okay too. That is all right. So we're going to look at a number, kind of doing this tonight more along the lines of almost like a crime scene. We're going to look at a few stories here from Henry County. I'm just going to present the stone cold facts. I might be a little bit biased here and there. And you can decide for yourself. And if you want my opinion, I can give it then, but that's up to you. The first place I'm going to start with is Gertie's Island. Gertie's Island is situated in the Maumee River. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the history of Gertie's Island. If not, a brief overview. Gertie's Island is believed to be the reported place where Simon Gertie, a renegade with the Native Americans, camped, lived his life, and traded with the Native Americans during the War of 1812, and even prior into the 1700s here, when Mad Anthony Wayne traveled up and down the Maumee River. Fact is that Simon Gertie never had a trading post on Gertie's Island. Problem number one. His brother, James Gertie, did. James Gertie was notorious for working with the Native Americans here in Northwest Ohio. He had a very nice cabin for him and his family that sat on the north side of the river looking over Gertie's Point. Gertie's Point, the name comes from James Gertie's looking point, not Simon Gertie's. Now, James Gertie lives on the north side there of the river. He looks over Gertie's Island. His brother is Simon Gertie. They also have another brother, George Gertie. They all three were kidnapped by Native Americans. They were raised in the Native American way. They traded and bartered with the Native Americans for basically all of their life. It is quite historically accurate to say Simon Gertie definitely would have come through that area. He would have stayed at James Gertie's trading post as well as George's trading post up and down the Maumee River. The problem is that Simon Gertie was the most hated brother of them all. Simon Gertie was ruthless. He wasn't a friend of ours. Seeing that we're all American, he didn't like us too much. Simon Gertie worked with the Native Americans, which meant during the War of 1812 he was allied with the British. So he spent a lot of his time hiding in the Northwest Territory from the American troops who were traveling up and down the Maumee River. This meant, and this is where the legend comes, that Simon Gertie would hide out on the island. Because when the troops would pass through, they would tear up the trading post, burn it, and you'd have to go hide somewhere, or you would be captured. Did he hide on Gertie's Island? We don't know. Historians don't know. We have dug for information. There's no concrete proof that says Simon Gertie ever hid on Gertie's Island. He would have been there though at some point, probably several points. Simon Gertie, I said, was most hated. Why was he most hated? Simon Gertie was at the burning of Colonel Crawford. Colonel Crawford was an American general for the Army during the War of 1812. Crawford County, Ohio, was named after him. In Crawford County, he was burned at the stake by the Native Americans. He was stripped naked, he was tied to a post, and he was not set on fire like you think. Instead, the Native Americans built a nice big 6-foot ring around him and tied him up. Then they lit the fire. Not so he would burn to death, but the heat would make his skin boil. While he was dying and suffering from heat inhalation, all that smoke he's inhaling, Simon Gerty did appear. He came there. Simon Gerty came to watch this spectacle. And Colonel Crawford called out to him, knowing Simon Gerty very well. He called out to him. Apparently, they had at one point actually been good friends, and he called out to Simon, "Please help me." And he said, and Simon said, "What do you want me to do?" He said, "Put me out of my misery." So he said, "Okay." And Simon Gerty loaded his musket, but of course, he didn't put a musket on it. Instead, he shot Colonel Crawford 2 times with just straight black powder, so it would burn up his skin. Colonel Crawford obviously would die at the brink of burning. He would be no more. Simon Gerty would go off to live the rest of his life as a drunk, and he would later die in Canada. However, Simon's life apparently doesn't stop there. Rumor has it that after he died, he was doomed to forever haunt the island that he left, Gerty's Island. He is reported to appear on the north tip at night, and he polishes General Mad Anthony Wayne's cannons. 2 gentlemen in the 1900s came down and stayed the night on Gerty's Island because it was an old Victorian amusement park at one time. They stayed the night, they're sleeping, and they claimed to hear the sounds of people screaming. By closer inspection, they found that it was actually the voices and the screaming of people who were being skinned alive on the island. Flesh just stripped and torn out. They ran to the other island, the end of the island, and at that same time a boat was coming by late at night. It was picking up its last people off the island, and they were frantic. "Stop, stop." They even dove into the water and tried to get to the boat. When they got to the boat, and when they pulled them up out of the water, they said, "Simon Gerty's on the island, and he's skinning people alive." Simon Gerty had been dead for a long, long time. So apparently Simon Gerty's spirit was skinning people alive. Simon Gerty, we do not know for sure if he ever really skinned people alive, but we can assume from what he did at Colonel Crawford's burning, Simon Gerty was probably pretty notorious for not treating American prisoners very well. So to say that he ever skinned anyone alive isn't entirely fact, but it could pretty much be guessed he probably did. On Gerty's Island? Probably not. Gerty's Island has no record of being used as prisoner holding camps. It wasn't an Indian village at one time, though they were there. So, is Simon Gerty still polishing Mad Anthony Wayne's cannons? I don't know. His cannons have never turned up. Rumor has it that someone did find a cannon out on Gerty's Island. The story goes that they loaded it into their boat, and when they started to back the boat out, the weight of the cannon, an old 1812 cannon, tipped the boat backwards. The cannon flipped up and out of the back of the boat and went to the bottom of the river. Well, good news about Gerty's Island, it's surrounded by about 4 foot of water. If everyone's boated up there, you can hit rocks, like in the middle of summer. So they dove down and they claimed they couldn't find the cannon because it had sunk so far down into the muck because of the weight. It's probably a decent story, but probably just a story. Ironically, when I was doing some historic preservation work out at Northwest State Community College, I had been asked if I had ever been on Gerty's Island. I said, yes, I had been. There's a number of things out on Gerty's Island still to this day, because again, it was an amusement park during the early 1900s. This here is an original rock that I recovered. An original rock, how cool is that? Awesome! I've got more out there if you want. This is actually an original stone from the first cabin ever built out on Gerty's Island. It was built when they were just setting up the amusement park in the 1890s. It was Gustav Vaught's cabin, in which he officially finished in 1899. He was about 18, 19 years old when he finished building the cabin, completely out of river rock. So not many 18 or 19-year-olds do that today. But the cabin remains are still there. All the stones are piled up in a massive heap. So there's a little piece of Gerty's Island history. No ghosts have come of that. It's been pretty boring. It's been a nice doorstop. This here is a bottle that came out of that cabin. I found that buried down below in the mud. So there's a little bit of Gerty's Island history there. What else has been found? The point is that when I was out in Northwest State, they said, what else have you found out there? I said, just stuff. I found a roller skate from the roller skating rink when I was there. My mom threw that out later on. They said, have you ever found anything from Simon Gertie? I said, no, I haven't. I said, we have something really weird that we'd like to see what you think about. I said, okay. So what is it? They said, it's a cannonball. I said, really? And at closer inspection, this cannonball had a British stamp still on it. The crown, the royal crown from the British military. This cannonball was a cannonball from the War of 1812 and had been inspected by the British. They put their stamp of approval so that when they lobbed it over a Fort Wall somewhere, all the Americans would know that it came from them. This cannonball was found on Gertie's Island. So, how did it get there? Why was it there? Was there a cannon or a gun to go with it? Again, I don't know. But it is very interesting that a British cannonball was recovered. The only interesting thing is it's a British cannonball, but everyone claims they're Mad Anthony Wayne's cannons, which means it's an American gun, an American cannon. So, people have fled the island in fear. We have a cannon that never, well, maybe turned up, but we don't know. We do have a British cannonball, and some people who claim they saw or heard Simon Gertie skinning people, but as far as that goes, I haven't stayed the night out there. And I'm not going to. So, chicken? Hey, I can admit it. I'm a chicken. I'm not going on an island. What the heck? Get off. So, that's my Gertie's Island story. That is actually well documented in the Ohio history books. If you look at the Ohio ghost stories of the state of Ohio, if you look up Henry County, Simon Gertie's in there for his specter on Gertie's Island. Our next stop we're going to is an interesting one. It's got a lot more interesting about the last month. Robert King Scott, Scott's Mansion, which is in Des Moines. A lot of people, I won't say everyone, but a lot of people know it just sold. Everyone went to the big auction so they could get in the house and try to find the hidden rooms and the tunnels to the, I don't know, Pacific Ocean or whatever it is. And there's just all kinds of rumors about this mysterious house. I had a PowerPoint prepared, but we didn't kind of get our TV and stuff lined up. I do have here, I'll pass this around for you to look at. This is Gertie's Island, just prior to it becoming an amusement park. It's a pretty weird photo. There's barely any trees on it because they cleared the land. And the original start of the amusement park, you can see in the backdrop, there is a house, the concession stand is erected, and then the barn for the animals that would later become the concession stand food. So I'll pass that around. That's pretty interesting. Has anybody ever been out to Gertie's Island? Went around it.
Boat. Was he one of the brothers who were married?
Simon, George, and James all would eventually get married. George would wind up dying. He and Simon did have a very bad alcoholism problem after the War of 1812. And George was drinking very heavily one day, and James told him basically, get out of my cabin. And he missed the step, and he hit his head. And he suffered probably now what we would know to be a very severe concussion. They laid him down in the bed, and he blew to death on the brain. He passed away. Simon Gertie would go up to Canada. He would get into several bar fights. He gets in a bar fight so bad that he loses part of his vision from being punched so hard in the face. He also loses part of his hearing on his left side. And it was said that he was in a drunken stupor on his way home one night, fell in the gutter, managed to get home, but he would later pass away too from his drinking. The other brother, it would appear that he had several children and would not succumb to the same nasty habits of his other brothers. There is, but how the family trees break down, I'm not quite sure about it. So anyway, moving to Scott's Castle or Scott's Mansion. Robert King Scott was born July 8, 1826. He passed away August 12, 1900. He was an American Republican politician, not with a great past and not with a great track record. Kind of sounds like our American government today, but we won't get into that. Not showing any political bias or anything, I promise. But he was the governor of South Carolina. He was the 74th governor. He had a very troubled career down in South Carolina. There was questions about where some money was going in the government, how people were getting elected to office, and it kind of just became something of, you better get out of office. Robert King Scott, I don't think, was probably the most friendly of gentlemen. In Napoleon and Henry County, we like to kind of brag about him. Hey, that's real cool. He built that big house, and he had a big name all along the north because it's his participation in the Civil War and as a governor. Really, when you start to do the research, he's kind of a problematic figure. In December, he goes, again, darn alcohol. What does this tell us? He went down to the Wellington Hotel, which was in Napoleon. I'm sure some of you remember the Wellington Hotel. I remember when I was a kid, it was a big polling ground. And just burnt down. He went there with his wife. They were going to go out for some drinking. They went out to the billiard room of the Wellington Hotel. At that time, it was called the Miller House. It was the same building, same hotel. It was beautiful. That is where high society in Henry County and Napoleon went to celebrate Christmas, Thanksgiving, and New Year's. They had gone for a night of drinking. They were gambling. Of course, he was smoking. And his young son, by the nickname of Archie, I don't know where that comes from, Archie. I would not want to be called that. But Archie also had a drinking problem at a very young age. And he would frequent taverns. That's what the history books say. Archie frequents taverns. He would go down to downtown Napoleon and hop from saloon to saloon to saloon and he would drink. Well, he was embarrassed that night to go home to his mom and dad and let them see him in his stupor, in his state. So he went down across Hauntings, which was there at the time, cut across the street, and he stopped at what is now Venus, the t-shirt shop there. And it was a drugstore at the time, and he knocked on the door late at night, and his 23-year-old friend, Warren Drury, opened the door. He said, I'm going to help you. He said, I am just, I don't know exactly what he said, but if I learned something like I'm plastered and I can't have my mom and dad find out. So he said, can you please give me a place to stay? He said, sure, I'll share my bed with you, that's fine. They went back to the back of the shop. Warren got him all put up in his bed. And Warren started to get around for the night. He had a big week coming up that following week. On Monday, he had a really important date that was coming up with his girlfriend. Well, word got back to General Scott. He says, where's my son at? He was losing his patience, losing his school. So he sent one of his friends out. Who that friend is, we don't know for sure. His friend came back and said, your son is held up at the drugstore, and I think he's probably pretty drunk. General Scott said, go back down and tell him I won't come back. So the gentleman walked down from the Wellington Hotel, down to the drugstore, said, Warren, I think, aren't you better get back to the Wellington Hotel? Okay. Brushed the gentleman off, the gentleman left and went back. Told General Scott, I don't have any to come with me. General Scott said, okay, I'll go get him. Took his last sip, he went down the street there in Napoleon, ran in front of the Hokie building, veered off to his left, in front of Spangler's, and he crossed over and he knocked on the door. He said, Warren, I want my son, and I want him now. Warren says, well, I don't really know where he's at. He says, no, you do know where he's at. He's out back in the room, isn't it? He's in your bed. All right, I'll take you back there. So they walked a long length of our downtown buildings, front to back, and they get back to that bedroom door, and for whatever reason, Warren turned around and pulled the door shut, and he wanted to let General Scott in. And General Scott pulled out his revolver that was in his pocket and shot him through the head. The bullet went up, it would hit right into his lobe here, and it would ricochet in the backside of his head. 23 years old, he slumped on the floor, started to bleed to death. General Scott kicked the door open, went in, drug his son out of bed, down the street back to the Wellington Hotel, threw him up in the billiard room, walked in and said, I think I have a problem. And they said, what? He said, I just shot somebody. He said, the gun went off by itself. Everyone was like, okay. So they finished their night of drinking. Meanwhile, Warren was downtown, bleeding to death by himself. Well, someone in the hotel felt kind of bad about that. They went down and checked on him. They got him up. The report goes that he was at that time still breathing. By the time this gentleman had repositioned him, though, he stopped breathing. He who did pass away there. Well, General Scott would go on trial. Napoleon and Henry County had a pretty bad problem though. They didn't have a courthouse. It had just burnt down in the Dutch Row fire. And now they have one of the largest American politicians, one of the largest, on trial, and no one would have a trial. So they went to one shoe store. They said, "Can we use your second story?" And they said, "Sure." So they had the trial in the second story of Wen's shoes. And Scott would go on trial. A lot of people would get upset about it. Things in Henry County would get kind of crazy. A gang would come down from Toledo. Toledo had gangs even back in the 1800s. They would load up, they would get on a train, they would come down and decide they were going to rough up General Scott a little bit and some of his supporters. Somehow, again, we don't know how, somebody boarded the train, probably instructed by General Scott to get the guys drunk. So they supplied them with some alcohol, they had a great time partying on the train. The report goes by the time they got to the point, they completely forgotten what they even got. So, he got off there. He goes on trial. He claims his gun went off completely on accident, completely by itself. So he got off scot-free. And that is where, so it's claimed in American history, that term comes from, right here in little old Henry County. He got off scot-free, didn't he? So that's just one of General Scott's many problems, just to kind of show you what kind of guy he was. He would go on to build his house, Scott Mansion, which sits right down from the Point Public Library. Scott's Mansion, if it looks a little out of place, of course because of its size it is, but it's also built in a little bit different style. Scott admired and loved the Southern style of building. When he was with the American Army during the Civil War, they would plow through these big plantations, they would see these great big Southern homes, these double-stacked porches, and he says, when I get back to Henry County, that's the kind of house I'm going to build. And everyone's going to know whose house that is. So he built Scott's Mansion in the style of Southern mixture of a plantation and just the farmhouses he saw. It has several large turrets. It has a full castle-topped tower. It was supposed to have a library in it that never got finished. It was also claimed then later on by General Scott it has a room inside. The room will only be found if you tear down my house. To this day, that room has never been found. General Scott always claimed that inside that room would be some of the biggest treasures and most expensive things you can ever find, but he never elaborated on. Tear down the house and find what he said. He said, there's also several other hidden rooms in my house. Today, 2 of those rooms have turned out. The one can be accessed from the attic. You go up to the 3rd story. Again, he doesn't build 2-story homes, he builds 3-story homes. You go up, then you go into the attic, you pull up the floorboards, and it leads you down a staircase. That staircase goes into his office. So when General Scott was in his office, you would never know how to get to him because he could just pull those stairs right up, just like an attic ceiling. And he was in it by himself. Another room has a staircase that kind of just leads to the ceiling. It's kind of weird. You go into this little area, and the staircase just kind of goes right up and stops. What he kept in those rooms, we don't know, but it certainly adds to the mystery of the house. And the mystery of the house is several things. Today, it's reported that there are numerous footsteps that are heard. With such a large house, it's never quite sure where these things come from. Maybe Warren's coming back to see him. He's literally out for some blood. One night there was a report of stair step noises. Someone walking down the stairs. And the person who was living in the house at the time came out to the front entry room, turned around, and claimed, this is coming from the owner at that time, General Scott was standing in a men's dress suit on the staircase with his hand on the railing, looking right at her as she stood in the family room. He tipped his top hat, turned around, and went back upstairs. And she just kind of got a little creeped out from what I was saying. She didn't run out the front door. Instead, she did decide to follow him. She went up the stairs, she called out to him, "R.K. Scott." He didn't answer, he was gone. Later on, this same owner would be out in the front. She would come home one night in the kitchen, she claimed to see a woman in a white apron and gown. Apparently, General Scott's servants are still serving him today. It's described as a female. She's young, very pretty, but very pale and very white. She's often seen in the back of the house doing her duty. Other things that have come up at General Scott's house include cold spots. Cold spots happen with spirits. Sometimes this is believed. Other people might believe, well, it's an old house, and of course there's cold spots. It's called a draft. Cold spots, though, are believed to be spaces where ghosts will take out energy in the air. They will use it to make themselves able to appear as orbs, mists, or apparently General Scott has a lot of energy as a full-blown figure or apparition. They hear walking in the hallways, doors shut and slam, hazy figures hover above the bed at night. There was one point where the grandchildren stayed the night at the house, and the grandkids woke up and were giggling and laughing. They were not scared. And when the grandma went in to check on them, they claimed that the woman over top of them was playing tickling them. There was no woman in the room. So that's kind of the story of General Scott's house. I know the new owners, this is kind of just maybe a little bit of reference for the newspaper kind of here. I know the new owners that just took over the house. They're very friendly people, but they are very nervous about this kind of stuff. They're not opposed to this being talked about, but their house is not open for ghost tours or anything like that. And possibly everything right now is very good. Maybe just General Scott's house, keep off the record. This next one, if you have any information about, I would greatly appreciate it. It's something that's kind of troublesome, and it's going to strike kind of close to home for McClure. And again, if anyone has any information on this, if my information is wrong, or you know more, I would encourage someone to speak up, because it's something I've been researching for quite a while, but it just always leads to dead ends. This is Carrie S. Van Valkenburg's grave, also known as Carrie's grave. Olive Branch Cemetery, correct? Yep. Carrie's grave is in Olive Branch Cemetery. It's centered in the cemetery up the hill, and it is the only grave that is enclosed by a fence, an old Victorian metal fence. I would not be doing my historic preservation duty by talking about ghost stories if I did not say some of these stories that we're going to get into. I don't have actually too many more. Are going to delve a little bit into vandalism and respect for places, and I'm not preaching to you guys because I'm sure you're not out knocking tombstones over. But Carrie's grave, first and foremost, has suffered a lot of damage. I used to go there and check on it every once in a while, not to ghost hunt, but go to see it, as I know a lot of high school kids like to go there. When I went there about 2 years ago, her grave looked like this. This is her tombstone. Carrie was still readable on it. There was a broken chunk of a tombstone behind it, an empty Dr. Pepper can, among many other things, including beer bottles. And definitely the scene of a party. And it's kind of troublesome to me because, yeah, ghost stories are fun and everything. And of course we're here to talk about that. But ghost stories sometimes bring along unwanted things to these people and to their grave sites. The story goes that Carrie, there's two stories. Carrie was a young child, she was a baby, she got sick and she died. That's the story. She got sick and she passed away. Her parents were greatly distraught. They took her out of the Branch Cemetery and they buried her as an infant. Her mother was so distraught by this, though, however, that on a very late night she could not handle the nightmares and night terrors she was having, so she went to Olive Branch Cemetery and dug Carrie up. She was found weeping over this young child by some of the people in the McClure village, as it was called. And they took her to the infirmary. The infirmary for Henry County is now known as Country Haven. She was taken to the infirmary. Later on, her mother was sent to the state mental institution, where she would later die. She would be brought back to be buried next to Carrie here in Olive Branch Cemetery. The second story is that Carrie was the basis of a novel She was a young high school girl who did a little bit too much witchcraft. She was made fun of, and one night would go out to Oliver Cemetery and commit suicide. The story always varies, it always changes a little bit. So if I'm not telling you how you like it, I apologize. She would commit suicide out there, and because of that, they erect a fence around her so that nobody will ever make fun of or pick on Carrie ever again. And people who didn't like her would be kept out away from her grave. That was also reportedly erected by her parents. So the only thing that seems consistent is her name is Carrie, she's a female, and her parents hold a fence around her. Problem is that in the first story, Carrie dies as an infant. The second story, she dies as a teenage girl. Usually people like to put her around 16 or 17 years old. If you consult the records, Carrie is born in 1876 in Wood County, Ohio, USA. Her death is April 24th, 1887. So, the ages are kind of conflicting there with the records. 1887. But she was born in 1876. So, it's not terribly off by any means, of course, but one thing that is interesting, she dies in Adams County. She dies in Adams County. So apparently she hopped on a train, rode a horse, and decided that she would die in Adams County. Suicide there. Or she crawled really, really fast. But again, the dates just don't line up. So what is the deal with Carrie's grave? White figures are seen. Her mother is seen apparently crying over the grave. Screams are heard at midnight. So if we wait just a little bit longer, we can all get in a car and go out there, and we'll hear her scream as she apparently slits her throat where she's buried. The other thing that has apparently happened out there supposedly is there have been other people who have gone out there. They've gone out to see Carrie's grave late at night. They've been pulled under the earth by her angry hands. And then another one is that Carrie has come up out of her grave and stabbed them with a rung off of the fence. Yeah. Yeah, there's something more than just Coca-Cola involved in these stories. If you know anything kind of about Legends of Carrie, some of these things line up and sound very popular and very Hollywood-like with the movie Carrie by Stephen King. This is supposedly where that legend comes from. I find that highly hard to believe that Stephen King came to McClure, Ohio, stayed with one of the fine folks, came to Sunday church, and then went out there and wrote a novel. I just don't see it. So am I saying Carrie's grave is not haunted? I will admit, I have gone out there at nighttime. I had gone there at nighttime with one other person. Gone there twice. Nothing's happened. I've gone there daytime. Nothing's happened. And when I do go there, I do feel a certain amount of sadness, but it's not sadness because of the ghost. I think it's really disappointing that our teenagers in Henry County have vandalized her grave to the point of its abandoned, it's gone. The last time I went out there, Carrie's tombstone that you saw is gone. Someone has stolen it. And both of her parents' tombstones were smashed with a sledgehammer. So now if you go out there, the fence has nothing in it. This summer I stopped out there because I want to see, what else was there. Somebody had hooked up a four-wheeler to the fence, and they had gone mudding and tore the side of the fence off. So Carrie's grave is, I don't think she was probably made fun of as a teenager, but now more so than ever, I think her and her family are suffering a great atrocity. I think they were just normal, everyday people, just like us. They had hopes, dreams, and aspirations here in Henry County, and I think some of our Henry County residents have left them down. So Carrie's grave, I would just like to kind of throw out there on the burner that I don't think it's haunted. I think Olive Branch Cemetery is a very nice cemetery, and hopefully all of us can go out and say, hey, you kids, go drink and drive elsewhere, or just don't do that at all.
What did it say?
Her tombstone very lovingly had her name, and then it had, of course, daughter of and then it listed her parents' names and her age at that time. Her father's tombstone was on, I believe, the right side of her. Her mother's tombstone was on the left side of her, so she was between them. For whatever reason, this is very interesting. There is a flagpole that still stands there. Somebody put a full-fledged flagpole on that grave, which I'm not quite sure about. I don't know if her father served in the military at one time, or if that was just where Olive Branch decided because it's fairly centrally located. Let's put a flagpole there. But the flagpole clearly hasn't been used in years either. It's pretty rusted and decayed away.
4 or 5 years ago, there was nothing there other than the fence.
4 or 5
You've
years
been
ago.
there.
Okay. I know the last time when I saw the tombstones last, they have been reconcreted. You see that a lot in cemeteries. They try to put them back together. They look like a jigsaw puzzle. You can't read them. Looks more like an artistic project, but they were standing there then. So I'm sure probably over the years they have come and gone.
There was nothing there other than
And and now they're definitely long gone now. They've been repaired once. So another cemetery. This is a mystery, and this is going to be. I'm going to kind of wrap off here now tonight. These are the last. This is kind of the environmental show here, so it's going to be a little sweet.
There we go.
So I hope you have someone sitting next to you and hang on to. Shawman Edwards Cemetery. Kind of spoke briefly about this last time when I was here, on a whim because I've been asked, but we're going to go over it. Shawman Edwards Cemetery is located within Mary Jean Thurston Park. It's out along the Moyer River. I even brought a map, so once you leave here, you can go out and you can see what you can find. I won't go with you. Real quick, so everyone knows, what we're looking at here when I start talking is, this is the location of the Shawman Edward House. This is the location of the Shawman Edward Cemetery. Both of them you will still struggle to find even with this map, and we'll get there here in a little bit. Shawman Edwards are very important people in Henry County history. They are some of the major developers of our farming and agriculture. They are very active and prominent with our government here in Henry County as they set up some of the first courthouse hearings and appearances. They are very active in mapping off the land and the coordinates here in Henry County. They are some of the first people that actually come into this area and make it to where our ancestors are able to come in and settle later. The Shawman Edwards family's main compound set on U.S. Route 24, about 6 miles east of Napoleon in Washington's Township, Henry County. They would have a series of homes built along that road because they had numerous children. David Edwards had many children. I would venture that I'm blanking now on that, I will admit, but roughly about nine or so children. During that time period, they had a very agonizing task. They had to clear and drain the black swamp. So many children, many hands would go much further and not have them. After the Shawman Edwards family developed their land, they built a very beautiful house. That house is the star that is on there. That is sitting on the outskirts of Texas, Ohio. At that location, they would birth the first white child born in Washington Township. The Indians were still in the area at the time, and accustomed to their traditions, they would plant a large oak tree. That oak tree still stands today right outside of Texas, Ohio, and it does have a historic marker on it. The tree is unfortunately starting to die because of some of the chemicals that it's spraying around it from the farming. But it is still there, and it still does have leaves on it. That was planted by the Indians, and it was said the Shawman Edwards family would frequently have supper with the Indians. They would come down the river, they would park their canoes, and they would go into the house that stood there, again, where that star is, back in the woods in the tree line. They would usually feast on pig for some reason. Native Americans did not have any pigs running around the villages, but they certainly were getting that from the cattle on the farm. Along with that, Native Americans would bring other offerings. They would bring sage with them. I brought sage because of what it does. It's believed in Native American mythology, I guess, that sage purifies and cleans the air. It keeps evil spirits away. They would burn that because the land the Showman Edwards family was living on wasn't everything it was cracked up to be. Previous to them settling, it had been the final hunting grounds of the Ottawa Indians. It's said that when they left to go west, not by their choice, some of the Indians didn't go with them. And it wasn't the ones that were still alive. They left some warriors behind to protect their last hunting grounds here. The Showman Edwards family would live a very productive, very good agricultural life here in Henry County, and they wound up passing away and being buried in the Showman Edwards Cemetery, which is in the Mary Jane Thurston Woods. Today, that cemetery can still be found. It has about 10 bodies buried there, all of the Showman Edwards descent. There are roughly 2 Civil War soldiers, a War of 1812 soldier, a Spanish-American Civil War soldier, and then their wives. Today, Showman Edwards Cemetery in its entirety looks like this. That is a pile of gravestones and an overgrown woods. If you look at Henry County Genealogical Society, it lists Showman Edwards Cemetery as a destroyed cemetery by human means. In the 40s, a farmer would take over the property. This farmer's family is still around, so I'm going to eliminate his name. But when he took over the farmland, he decided it is really a pain to plow around tombstones. So I'm going to pull them up, and I'm just going to pile them off in the brush pile. So he pulled all the tombstones out. So the legend goes that the Indians that were there, the native people, their spirits saw this, and being friends with the Edward family, apparently, and I don't know if you know this because I don't know who's talking to these spirits, decided that they would get the farm back for this. This farmer drove his tractor across the bridge that is still standing. This bridge is still there today. This leads to the cemetery. When he drove the tractor across the bridge, the Indians turned his tractor over on him. And he died. Sounds a little crazy. That's a little untrue. Until I went there for myself, and his family has dedicated a marker to him on the spot where the tractor rolled over and killed him. And then that kind of gave me shivers down my spine. That's reported in the Henry County books. And then you see the plaque, and it's like, okay. You make your way back, you'll find the tombstones piled up. Sometimes I go there, they're piled. Sometimes when I go there, they have been scattered around by the teenagers. So far, the last time I went back, the stones seem to be getting fewer and fewer. I don't know if people were there taking them, right, just as much as they just can't handle being tossed around anymore. Ironically, the Showman Edwards Cemetery and the woods would be turned over to the state. It would become a park. They would let the woods grow back up, and today it looks very much like it looked when the Native Americans were here. It is state ground. People do hunt there, and reports of odd things happening when people are hunting. They see things, people hear things, have started to really come out around the woods. If you've seen the Blair Witch Project, that's almost kind of our version of it here in Henry County. And this would be, to a certain extent, where I would say, this is somewhere that I will admit I don't like to know. I have been back there quite a while. There's reports of shadow figures. Shadow figures are black shadowed people, who apparently run through the woods. It's believed that those people are warriors all the way back from the War of 1812, doing their job, which is to keep you out of their grounds. Today, those shadow people have been seen supposedly by high school students, people hunting. There have even been reports of gentlemen sitting in their deer stand, as quiet as can be, and then they hear a deer and they turn around, and it's not deer coming to the woods. It's a person zipping. Another one zips by. The Showman Edwards family seems to be quite angry about how their new cemetery is also been treated. Where the Showman Edwards house is became quite a party haven for teenagers back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. Art students at DuPoint High School would go out there and take photos of this house for their art projects. It was in disarray at that time. It was abandoned. They made it really cool. backdrop against the woods. When this particular student would take her photos back to Point High School, this is in the 80s, she would develop the photos and she would find that there was a girl leaning out the second-story window with a bonnet on. She would also find another spirit hovering in a tree out in the front lawn, and then in several other photos, this young girl made an appearance. It was always apparently the same girl. There's one girl that lived in the house the entire time. She was born there, raised there, and she would eventually be removed from the house in her 90s. That's Martha Edwards. That would be the first white child born in Henry County, Washington Township. Apparently, she didn't want to go anywhere else but back home. Some more parties would happen, and eventually Showman Edwards' house would catch fire. It would burn to the ground, and today, if you go out there into that woods, the foundation of the house is still there, and what's left of the house is still piled and heaped in the basement. I went out there one time. I've only been there one time, ever. I've never gone back. There were bottles hanging in the front tree, still in the front lawn, glass bottles. Glass bottles hanging in trees is a sign of voodoo. It's something that's used in voodoo to ward off spirits. Saw that, kind of creeps you out. And then there were animal bones that were in black trash bags. They were duct taped together. A number of other odd things were a couch sitting in the front lawn. Assumably somebody took it out there for their party. But it was a very weird feeling out there. Going down to Showman Edwards Cemetery has an equally weird feeling, the feeling of being followed, seeing things. Late at night, eyes will appear as they watch you walk down the winding, twisted trails. And then this is kind of my final story for this evening, there's a constant occurrence that happens, and this is the appearance, or the knowledge of knowing that the Wendigo is home there. The Wendigo is a very real, very true legend from the Native American people who lived here. It goes all the way back to the 1600s. The Wendigo is known as a shapeshifter. This is a spirit that can take any form of anything. The Wendigo appears sometimes as a thin-looking, creepy human being. Basil Johnson, who was an Ojibwa warrior in this area, right in this area, was quoted as saying the Wendigo was a gaunt, emancipated figure. Its skin pulled tautly over its bones, with its bones pushing out against the skin. Its complication of its ash-gray skin, and its depth, and its eyes, which were pushed back, sunken into their sockets. The Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton, recently disinterred from its grave. Its lips were tattered with blood, unclean and suffering from lack of food. Its flesh hanging. It gave off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption. Somehow, Basil Johnson, this Ojibwa warrior, managed to see this creature and safely made it back to his home, his village here in this area. That is a direct quote from the 1800s. When the white man would come in, he would be warned in this area of the Wendigo. He would also be warned of this all across the state of Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Pennsylvania, several states apparently, all the Native American people believe in this Wendigo. And the white man said, of course, they are uneducated, they don't know what they're talking about, these heathen, nasty, dirty Indians and their stories to scare us out of their land. As they began to move into this territory, they would build settlements deep in the woods, in the Black Swamp. People would go out, and people wouldn't come back. They would send out search parties. Well, they went off, and those dirty, nasty Indians, those heathens that we got to push out of this area, and captured them and taken them off. Until they found them. Typically turned up in creeks or riverbeds along the river. The creek that winds its way through Shunk, Ohio, supposedly had this problem. These bodies would be rolled over and they would find the eyes and the blood and sucked out. It was like a vampire. It would feed off the energy of living people. Eventually they decided, we need to do something about this. Nobody will go out at nighttime alone. We will set a curfew, especially for young children. This is supposedly where today our curfews come from. We think we don't want people spray painting things on our cars, and we want the kids off the street. No, we want our kids to come home. Later on, as they would begin to strip out the black swamp, they would cut down trees, and it was reported that this actually made it hard for the Wendigo to travel. Because he's a shapeshifter, and we have this big open field, how's he going to travel now? Wendigo, ironically, derives from the wind. He began to travel on air currents, and this is why if you go outside tonight and you go to get in your car, and you even so much as breathe the word of the Wendigo, you feel that breeze? Believe me, it's already too late. Later on, after the Native Americans would be pushed out of this area and pushed out west, they would warn the white man that we are leaving, we are going out west, we are going to the territory we have prepared for us, but we will not be taking him with us. They said him, and they said, the Wendigo, we will leave him for you. And they left and went out west. Reports claim that he's not real. Other journals from soldiers claim that they would hear things in the woods. Some would say, yeah, they were deer running. Others would go out to check, and ironically never come back. It made it very hard to say that the Wendigo wasn't real anymore when those dirty, nasty, heathen Native Americans were not in the woods anymore capturing people. Is the Wendigo real? I don't know. If you want to go out and take that map and go out to Mary Jane Thurston Park, I would not honestly invite you to do so. Out of all of our stories tonight, I would say that is one place I would steer clear of. I would go to Mary Jane Thurston Park in the daytime, maybe do some fishing, that's about it. Sunset, get out of there. This kind of concludes, I'm going to open up for questions, but I would just real quick like to say, very brief, this tombstone here is a real tombstone. This was given to me as a gift. Weird gift, I know. As an apple, I have something for you, okay? What is it? It's a tombstone. This was from Williams County. We're not quite sure the story on this. Apparently, the rumor had it that this young boy, Levi, he was born February 20th, 1852, died, February 20th, 1852. He was 7 weeks, 4 days old. Rumor has it that the tombstone was pulled up so they could build a barn there. We don't have any records on it, but I've done some sufficient digging over the last year, and the only Levi Barnum I can find in Williams County dies at the same time, but there's a problem. His name has a Y on the end of it. It's not spelled with an I. So my basic conclusion of recent is, yes, this is Levi's tombstone, but I think the guy who made this probably got in some hefty trouble. Because I'm hoping that he just simply spelled the name wrong and he had to redo the stone, because it is in such good shape. It's definitely not out in the elements for too long. But it's still creepy. And
Maybe you want to do the stories for you.
yeah, the story spelled wrong. Ironically, his death records, the family tree, and then the census records all spell his name with a Y. So hopefully he has a stone somewhere marking him. Because I know my mom would appreciate it if this was not sitting in our family room every Halloween. So, anybody have any questions on anything? Anything on Cameron County history, or? I mean, what? You're what?
I'm going to that Thursday.
You're going tonight.
No, you're going. I'm going to.
Showman Edwards. Yeah, it's going to be down the trail. That bridge that the gentleman died on is now off limits. You can't walk across it anymore. It's so rotted and decayed. So I think the state has laid down like a very thin boarded path, very creepy.
You can cross it.
Okay. And you follow that, the trails are going to split into like a labyrinth. It's like once you go in, you never come back out. So I'm warning you there. You're going to go straight, and it's going to be on your left side, and you might be hitting it at a good time, because in the fall you can certainly find things easier when the brush is grown up. I've been out there at nighttime, I think, 2 or 3 times. And the one time I did walk all the way back, and that was not the best of experiences. The other 2 times we pulled in, we sat in the car like girls, Not that there's anything wrong with that. Did you roll that window down? No. I mean, so, it's a stupid place, but
When we was out there, they had this obelisk, like,
yes,
about 10 feet from there.
yes.
Probably stood maybe this high.
Yes, that is the actual top. I don't know if someone was trying to steal it and they carried it like 10 feet and was like, wow, this is way too heavy. Not sure where my Sherman Edwards cemetery picture went, but David Edwards' tombstone is still out there. It's the only one that's still readable. It's going to be a perfect cube, and that obelisk goes on top of it. So how the bottom base of that got so far away from the top of it, I don't know. And which one's he under? Again, I don't know.
One of those stones has the children's names on it.
And that's David's. Yep. Cynthia, Martha, John, James. Yeah. And it's also got the AC on it. Any other questions or thoughts on anything? Nothing? Any
We have a
experiences?
picture of a house and a boat dock and that was set there at one time by that bridge.
Yeah, there were a lot of buildings from the Showman Edwards property. There's one standing today, that's it, there's only one. And that is, if you pull right into the park there, there's a big barn on the left side. You can see it right off the highway. That is the original, one of the original Showman Edwards barns where the animals would be kept. Further on down the road, you can see on the map, there is a clearing here. This is where David Edwards' son had his farm, and there are remnants of buildings out in that woods. Again, it's a very weird area. I mean, you can tell there was so much life there at one time, and then it's just all overgrown and nothing's there anymore. And it makes it very eerie. This would also be the location where, if you are familiar with Fallen Timbers, Turkey Foot Rock, which sits at the Battle of Fallen Timbers site today, comes from this park. They just picked it up and moved it down there because that is where the Native Americans met before the Battle of Fallen Timbers, and they drew inscriptions on it. Ironically, when the state of Ohio moved it to its site at Fallen Timbers, they put the concrete pedestal in and they made it wet to where the rock would kind of sit in that concrete. They flipped it over upside down and cemented it in with the drawings. Yeah, they won't wear off now. So,
I had a question about Scott.
yes,
You said he was a governor in South Carolina.
South Carolina, yes.
In case he came to the one.
He had been sent up here. He was a part of the Camp Laddie in Napoleon when they were mustering troops. He was very active in that, and he really liked this area for some reason. Why, I don't know. Interesting fact about him, he had a barber for the Ohio Volunteer Infantry from Camp Laddie would wind up picking up a barber to groom the men. He was black. And at the conclusion of the war, General Scott said, you should come back to Napoleon with us in Henry County and set up shop. And at that time, even though, yes, they were the Union side, they all said, what, a black man will never be able to stay in business in Napoleon. Nobody's going to go to a black barber. And General Scott says, if he's a good enough barber for me, yes, people will go to him. He came back to Napoleon, set up shop, and he had one of the most successful barber shops in Napoleon in the 1900s. And he would wind up being buried at Lebanon Cemetery, just behind General Scott's mausoleum. They wound up having a very good friendship. There's one photo of this barber in downtown Napoleon. It's during a festival, and there's this just sea of white people, and of course the 1900s. And there's one gentleman, there's one black gentleman. His face was just in the backside of the crowd. And Russell Patterson, of course, very well-known historian, identified that as General Scott's barber.
Where was his shop?
I don't know where his shop was. Napoleon went through a lot of changes in a very short amount of time. When the courthouse burned down, 22 to about 27 shops in downtown Napoleon would also burn down with that fire. So it leveled about 2.5 blocks. So we lost everything. And that's why when we go downtown, every single building has the same date on it for when it was built. And people always ask, well, why is that? Well, that's why. So, yeah.
Where
is the Scott House?
General Scott's house, again, if you're at the Point Public Library, you're gonna go down, I'm always so bad with names. You're gonna go down Clinton Street, and it's right there to Haley, and it's on the corner. The reason people always say, well, where is this enormous house you speak of? It is completely overgrown with pine trees and every imaginable tree possible. So, unless you are to like pull in the driveway, park, and awkwardly scuffle around some hedges, you really can't tell how big that house is until you really get on the side of it. And then it just opens up. It's just massive.
We were northwest corner.
Yes. Yeah, we're in West Point.
We were privileged enough a few weeks ago to be able to tour that house, and I can't remember what floor it was, I think it was the second. On one of the walls underneath, like 50 million wallpaper things, there's drawings on the wall. And they think that that was from the architects that built the house.
That would be very likely. Napoleon had some architects, and I'm not quite sure who they are. There's several houses along the river, and the Dr. John Bloomfield home that is owned by the Historical Society. When we removed the 13 layers of wallpaper in like 2001, there were drawings on those walls. They were the same drawings that were in the other houses.
I got a copy on my phone if you want to see it.
Okay. They usually were kind of creepy looking. They were men in top hats. Really weird. And the I don't know if it's the Bloomfield house or the other house that's down by the river. The ones like riding a broomstick, like creepy personality. Why is there a guy in a top hat riding a broomstick on the wall? Like, cover that up now. The Dr. Bloomfield house, we left all of ours exposed. They wrote the date, they wrote how many rooms they did on that date, and then their goofy self-portraits, or whatever they are also still exposed. We left them uncovered.
It was amazing to tour that house, top to bottom.
Yeah. It's a big old house, but it's got a lot of work too.
Yeah, the lower level, the scrolling on the woodwork, and when you get to the top level, it's so rough, I just wonder if that's where the service stayed.
Yeah, I can't say for sure. There's certainly a lot of rumors about that house. When I joked about tunnels to the ocean, the story always is tunnels to the river. And it was used to hide and take slaves out to the river during the Underground Railroad. Problem, the house was built after the Civil War.
Oh.
So,
That's what I was wondering.
yeah, there's one thing that will really, that's a fact. That's not ghost stories. It was built after the Civil War. So, and then interesting, if you go to the city building, which many people have, the city has no records of ever finding tunnels. And in today's time with underground wiring and sewers and anything imaginable, they had to have did something by now, and they just never trusted them. Sorry. But there's still that room we talked about, right? That if you tear it down and find it. Yeah, go up to Gertie's Island, there's some cars, the foundations of the dance hall are still there. The concrete pillars rise up out of the woods, it's very weird, I think there's about 6 of them, which is where they would have their dances. The main foundation of the concession stand is still there, and then several of the summer cottages that you could rent at that time are still there.
And a pile of
So, and a pile of rocks.
I just want.
If anyone has any private questions, you can come up, or if everyone is done, I don't want to keep taking up your time.
Well, thank you so much. That was good.
Thank you for having me out. Okay, yeah. I do not know where that stone is now. I was out there about 2 weeks ago before I was here, I would say. I'm pretty certain. If the stone is back, that's great. It's on the outside of the fence now.
Yes, it is.
Right. Yeah. Very weird.
Last time it was the Civil War.
Very interesting. Very interesting. what he's got here is he's got some photos that he found online. It's got a closer shot of Carrie's grave. There's no date on this, but it's got her tombstone cemented in the ground between a burn barrel and a water pump. And you've been there before, there's no burn barrels sitting out there in that vicinity or a water pump. So, yeah, there's like a few weird things.
Is that out of the branch?
That's what it has it listed as.
Yeah,
So-
well, I live just a quarter of a mile from it,
Hmm.
and I've been up there.
Where's the stone at now? Where's the gravestone at now?
I had no idea.
It's not there.
Nope.
That picture shows a couple of pumpkins. Who put it?
Well, again, if anyone has any questions, I have some cards up here, coming up October 26th. I will be giving a historic walking tour in downtown Napoleon. We will be going to the murder site where General Scott shot his, well, gunshot, right? And we will be going to the location of one of Napoleon's most famous hangings.
I've been up there.
We will also be covering the trial and murder by Wesley Johnson, which is a double axe murder in Henry County. It's the most brutal murder. We will be walking the footsteps of that murderer as he goes to the gallows, and then we will be also stopping by a speakeasy, the Wellington Hotel, and several other maybe haunted sites. So there's some information there. Thank you everyone for coming out, and have safe travels to your car.